On this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Ian Beckett. Ian, how are you?
I'm good, Terry. Thank you very much for inviting me along. It's
pleasure.
It's good to be here.
Good. And Ian, could you give our listeners an insight into who you are?
Well, I'm Chief Executive of a company called Salamanca Solutions and Eirtight Technology, one of them based in the US and the other in Ireland. For the last 30 years, I've been pretty much based in Ireland, globalizing US manufacturing in Ireland. They have been perhaps a little less efficient than they should be at understanding the various cultural differences between Europe, Africa, and the Middle East and the US, which we see very clearly on a day-to-day basis with the news that when you watch Mr. Trump performing. However, the simple issue is that I try to add value to reduce the costs of scaling a US product solution to meet the needs of customers worldwide. And since a large number of my previous companies have disappeared in the days of mini computers for line printers for mini computer companies and PCs, customizable PCs for consumers, the world has changed fundamentally over the years, but basic rules apply that companies, although they appear professional and calm and controlled, like a duck paddling across a pond, they're pretty much chaotic underneath. And the bigger the company, the more chaos reigns within the company.
Okay,
that's pretty much it.
Interesting. And given all your experience, you were touching on some key points there in terms of your experience in the past in terms of multinational, the American slant, the US business slant in terms of what you're trying to bring into Ireland and kind of. I mean, the topic that we're going to discuss today is company collaboration to achieve company goals, which I think is quite fitting. In terms of there's going to be a lot of change in future. There's a lot of change going on in companies right now. And it would be great, Ian, to get your insight and your experience into how you find that it's the best way to approach that and make it successful.
Okay. Well, you're quite correct, Terry, because the only thing I've noticed is things accelerate over time. There are far fewer companies now than there was in the past that have survived. But my approach is always the same, that mostly companies don't focus on their customers properly. And even if the company from a marketing perspective does, the individuals in the company tend not to. They tend to engage in internal politics, be it international politics between the headquarters and the regional office. I think everybody listening to this would understand the fact that engineers tend to dislike marketing people because they initiate change. And the example that I always think of is that famous Yes Minister show where the hospital with no patients got an award for hygiene. That this is very often what you find. And one perfect example of what I do, apart from say things like product lifecycle management or controlling change effectively, is one of my bosses who was in charge of technology worldwide, ended up as chief executive in one of our telecom companies in Ireland. And his first complaint to me was, everybody seems to be trying to do everyone else's job. The engineers would tell the marketing people how stupid they were, and vice versa would apply. And so I think the best way of looking at the approach that I developed with some marketing partners, that we simply give visibility to everybody in the company of what their correct role is, not only to the people in that role, but to everyone else about what everyone else's job is. And this creates internal competition that let's say, the noisy ones, the ones who are most aggressive, the ones who use bullying, type A tactics to aggressively resist change, they're exposed and they can't perform in their old way. They're held accountable to do their job that they must do.
With regards to so touching on that, right? So so what are you saying, Ian? That companies are, people within companies are failing to collaborate effectively.
Exactly, and I suppose one of the best examples, perhaps one of the very few companies that I worked for, was AT&T, and they initiated a global program to implement alignment of employees with company objectives and an alignment of the company with their customers' needs. And that's a little bit like when you were in school, you were taught about magnetism, all the arrows pointing in the same direction. And when this happens, and without going through a long and complex story, I ran the program in AT&T with 200 odd people out of 60,000 worldwide that were taking it. And the end results, I discovered later, was that the AT&T network systems in Ireland had increased profitability more than anywhere else in the world the following year. Okay. And this is basic alignment. Everybody focused at the same direction. Yep. And there's a number of simple approaches to start with, but I always look at things like rework. So a lot of engineering activity in a company assumes, and let's say even more so in a new company scaling, assumes that nothing changes. Produce X, build it forever. But in practice, every company is like, change is natural, is required. And to execute that change, it's a little bit like changing planes in mid-flight. It's easy to fall off the wings and, it's a long way down. Yeah. And the costs of doing that, especially if change is rapid, can make the product unprofitable. Now, let me give you a practical example of a company we bought in Austria. This company was bought in 2001 for a very public telco. The amounts were published, so it's not confidential. We bought it for €10. It was losing $50 million a month. Okay. We sold it for $1.5 billion 4 years later. One of the issues was, like a lot of other companies, when product marketing are under pressure to compete effectively in a market where they're the smallest player, they insist on doing what everybody else does, plus some more. Now, that is naturally going to be unprofitable, especially if you ask, give the salespeople the target of selling, not 3 options to the customer, but 50 options. They buy nothing. So the change is very simple. Make the product marketing people stand up a month later and say, this is what happened with my wonderful new product, and I'm proud to have achieved my objectives. 50% of the products disappeared. Another example of doing the same type of thing in a PC manufacturer. Yep. The same excuse of alignment of we have to do this because we have to be in the game was the 80-20 rule was touted, that 80% of our products mightn't make any money, but we have to have them in order that people have the choice. And I think pretty much everyone listening to this would have had the same excuse. My solution was to do a Pareto of exactly what the sales of every product was. It turned out that 96% of the products didn't even cover the costs that I was adding to the products. Okay, wow. Strangely, half the product managers were fired shortly afterwards, and the product complexity was reduced by 50%. That saves millions of dollars. Sounds simple, sounds trivial, but those alignments are perfectly big examples of how to make change happen at top level.
And touching on so going to company collaboration, mm-hmm. what do you find? So through all these examples and stuff, what do you find is the biggest challenge in terms of bringing together a group of people or whatever it might be?
Great question. It's all very well to have chaos and everyone disagreeing with each other, but rightly, how do you get them together? Well, people love to compete. They might hate their boss, but they pretty much like their peers, even if they're in other departments. And there are various techniques that work very well. They're really social engineering techniques for changing the way people behave and, in fact, the way people believe. One of them would be stop, start, continue. You pull a group of people together in a room, and I've used this extensively, either consciously or unconsciously for the subjects. You put up a couple of whiteboards, you identify the objectives, because everybody has a slightly different view of what the company objectives are, and you form groups around the room and get the people to present back what their collective priorities are. Now, a little bit like those religious meetings that you might have been dragged along to as a kid that are particularly popular in America with the evangelical preachers, where someone goes up the front and gives their testimony about this miserable sinner is no longer going to drink and do whatever is inappropriate, by the people actually feeding back the results of their team's work, their internal belief pattern changes. If they've said, I'm going to do X, I'm going to partner with marketing to do Y, we're going to listen to customer care when the product errors are identified, it actually happens. Now, it sounds insane because it just doesn't sound reasonable. But millions of religious fundamentalists can't be wrong because they make a lot of money that way.
Yeah.
You know that. And companies work exactly the same way. And even though I, at times, might be banging my head off the wall, it does seem to work. Now, one of the things I'll sort of say, because my role was, let's say, corporate, going to visit the regions, everybody knows the joke of, hey, I'm from corporate and I'm here to help you. And everybody else sees a seagull. And it's the essential component here is managing without power. So by persuading the people that you're working with that it's good for them, then things happen. But when you leave, it stays happening.
Yeah. And I think that's a trait of a good leader as well, in terms of, exactly your finishing sentence here on the basis of, it's still happening when that person leaves as well. In most of your experiences within large businesses, especially maybe with a US focus that's very structured, process driven, if I'm a small growing business in the UK, could be a fourth generation family, very cash rich, and you've never really had a real insight into Six Sigma lean manufacturing. You would value the insight of someone with that experience, but how's that tailored different from a large process-driven organisation to a possible fourth-generation family-owned business?
That's a great question, Terry, because strangely, it's easier. The problem with a structured organisation is that it's pretty hard to melt the structure and change it. And people hide behind the Six Sigmas and the lean manufacturing processes and use it as an excuse. But often these and I'm thinking of one of our big customers at the moment, which I'll talk about in a minute, but often these legacy customers, you could call them, the people who started their business 30 years ago, who knew what was right then, but suddenly their customers are complaining and their profits are declining and they're wondering how to do digital transformation if it sounds fashionable and everybody's supposedly doing it. And someone comes along and says, well, here's the training plan and here's this. their basic thought is, yeah, what does that buy me? So I'm looking at the issue of, let's say, the boss having the power to make the decision. In that situation, people are often frozen in a way of working that's quite a few years old. Many of the managers who've been in place for some time, and many of the frontline customer-facing staff who've similarly been there for many years, they don't really understand what each other does. So if you identify a pain point, which is what we'd always start with, usually it's customer care, because customer calls up, they want service yesterday, and they want it right. Want you to waste like a Trojan horse. You get the show rolling forward. And in one of our clients who makes windows and doors for the UK and Ireland, they have about 1.5 million square feet in the two countries. They ship products in a 2-week order to shipment cycle. They deploy them. We saved maybe 5 times what we charged them to make this happen. They moved from an entirely automated paper-based solution into a controlled tablet-based workflow management system. And this would be a large enterprise.
Yeah.
But your question was even slightly different. Let's say it's a small company wanting to scale to be a big company, but every time they've tried it, they've tripped up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in that situation, I'd use the same technique. I'd look at where they want to go, which they pretty much know, and say the first thing you've got to know is where you are today. And there was a company in Trinidad a couple of years ago that they said, yes, here are our documents. This is what we do. Here's the specification. But they'd been written 5-10 years ago. They were completely wrong. So often the first thing you have to do is say, well, what actually happens today? And not what actually happens from the manager's perspective, but talking to the people doing the work and say, tell me about your work. What do you do? What causes you pain? What keeps you here at the end of the month because things go crazy when you try to get the bills out? And then you focus at making the individual's jobs easier, save their time. And I think that leads to a slightly different area. When you're trying to change something, the first reaction that everybody gives you is, yes, I'm completely busy. I have no time to learn something new. Therefore, go away and come back when I'm not busy, which they never are, not busy. So by giving them some time to start with, and this is the stop, start, continue thing, that continue what you do, identify what it is, identify what's productive and profitable. Stop doing things that just are wasteful. Now, chatting by the coffee machine is one thing, but there are lots of things that people do that are ineffective that they maybe have been told to do, the reports they have to produce every month. And then this gives you the capacity to start doing something. And once you start doing something, then if that's the right thing, you're going to get more time. So it's working with, let's say, the lowest level person, not in a derogatory sense, but in a hierarchical sense in the company, that ensures that by everyone becoming a little more productive, then the company itself becomes productive. There's no point in making the chief executive much more knowledgeable about all the KPIs and the results, or their managers similarly. And there are other ways of looking at this. Maybe an inverted KPI, that you create competitive regions so everybody sees how the different people are working. So there's very simple tricks, very pragmatic tricks. But if the archetypal small farmer who wants to become big, or somebody who's run a business the same way for years, is suddenly shown, yes, this is the ABC of how to make things happen, and it's not very expensive, then that works.
And closing off, I think that's fitting in terms of, the importance of company collaboration as a group of people to achieve the goals of the company. And I think that's very, for me personally, I think the biggest thing from that is the communication as well, Ian, in terms of that, and the communication between all members within a business to make sure that the vision of where the business wants to go is...
that is critical, Terry. Very often a weak manager uses communication or constrains communication as being, they're the expert and they control the information. There's very little confidential information in a company. There's some, but not a lot. The best way of getting rid of a poor manager is to give his people the information, and that then the person must perform so that he's respected by his team players. Like one of the great example in Japan one time, where they're extremely hierarchical, which is quite similar to a lot of small companies.
Yep.
There, the employees almost elect their manager. If they don't respect him, they'll tell everyone he's an idiot, including him. I had one guy virtually having a nervous breakdown with this. But I put in a Dutch guy after failing with the local Japanese manager, and he got on great. He was perceived to add value, and he communicated, and they grew. And I think the issue is not that the senior management team or the supervisory team or some other level actually are successful, but that everybody in the company is collaborating appropriately together. It doesn't mean everybody knows everything about everyone else, like a knitting circle. It simply means that everybody knows their job, everyone knows their collective responsibilities, and a little bit like I use the term product lifecycle management, how to change things, that if everyone collaborates in prioritizing change together, then the pushback from one group saying, oh, we're too busy, we can't do this, or that's stupid, it's the wrong thing to do, is eliminated. And everyone's focused at flowing in the same direction.
Yeah.
So collaboration, I'd see, is like flow. You move in the same direction. And if there's less resistance, like a river flowing down over rocks, then things become more profitable. And it's easy to measure.
Okay, all right, that makes sense actually. Okay. And Ian, I've really enjoyed in terms of that input there, and I know the listeners, I know there's some golden nuggets in there that you've given. How, if somebody wanted to kind of find out more, if somebody's listening to this podcast or this video, and they're thinking, do you want to know what? A lot of that does resonate with me. And maybe it's time that I should think about maybe doing something. Nothing's more prominent than today. Then how would somebody reach out to you or be able to get?
Well, in everything, LinkedIn is probably a great way of connecting. I'm www.ianbeckett.com. I got in there early.
Yep.
Give me a call. Ask any questions. I've been working in really weird consulting environments for many years in countries that many people don't even want to go to. But I've never found an environment, sometimes I've nearly got shot, but I've never found an environment that hasn't worked. And I'm very happy to help. I ask, and you will always get an answer. And if I can't help, that's the first thing I'll tell you. That not up my alley. But in general, business grows on the basis of, if I can help you be more efficient, if I can help overcome a problem, you will adopt the same approach I have over the years, that every company I worked for that was paying me to be an executive, I would look at an issue saying, well, my loaded cost is X, and unless I can save 10X, then I'm going to eventually get fired. I was never fired. Companies closed, but I survived. So if I can help you using the same philosophy, if I can help you be more efficient, then give me a call.
Fantastic. And I really do appreciate it, Ian.